She built an empire from nothing, and in one night, the people she trusted most tried to bury her alive. Elena Whitmore had survived boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and every ruthless move the business world threw at her. But nothing prepared her for the moment she realized her own security director was selling her life's work to criminals, and had already sent armed men to make sure she never told anyone. Hunted through a city drowning in rain, bleeding and alone, she stumbled into a roadside repair shop expecting nothing but shadows. What she found instead was a quiet man in a dirty work shirt who looked like he had nothing left to fight for. She was wrong about that, dead wrong. If this story already has you hooked, drop a like and comment with your city below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The storm hit Portland like it had a grudge. Not the kind of rain that eases in slowly and gives people time to grab an umbrella. This was a wall of water that arrived without warning sometime around 11 at night, turning the streets into shallow rivers and knocking out traffic signals along half of Southwest Morrison. Thunder rolled so low it vibrated in your chest. The kind of night where any reasonable person stayed home, locked the doors, and decided that whatever needed doing could wait until morning. Elena Whitmore was not having a reasonable night. She ran, not jogged, not hurried. Ran. Full stride, heels long since abandoned somewhere back on the parking structure stairs, her bare feet slapping against wet pavement in a way that was going to hurt badly tomorrow if she lived that long. Her blazer was soaked through. Her hair, which her assistant Priya had spent 40 minutes perfecting that morning for the quarterly board presentation, was now plastered flat against her face. She kept pushing it back with one hand, but it fell forward again immediately, every single time, and somewhere in the animal panic of the moment she almost laughed at how stupid that was. Worrying about her hair while men with guns were 6 blocks behind her. Almost laughed. Didn't. She ducked into an alley between a closed laundromat and a Vietnamese restaurant, pressing herself flat against the brick wall, chest heaving. 30 years old and she was already breathless. She used to run half marathons. That felt like someone else's life now. She listened. Voices behind her. 2 of them, maybe 3, talking into earpieces. She couldn't hear the words, just the tone. Controlled, professional, unhurried. That was the part that scared her most. They weren't running. They didn't need to. They had her phone's location already, or they thought they did. She'd smashed the phone against a concrete pillar in the parking garage and left the pieces on the ground by the elevator. Bought herself maybe 20 minutes of confusion before whoever was coordinating them figured out the signal had gone dead in a place she obviously wasn't. 20 minutes. She'd used maybe 15 of them. Think. Her left shoulder throbbed. She'd hit it hard coming down the fire escape, missed the last landing in the dark, and crashed sideways into the dumpster below. Nothing broken, she didn't think, but every time she moved her arm the wrong way, it sent a spike of pain straight up into her neck that made her teeth clench. She pressed her palm against it and breathed through her nose. 3 hours ago, she had been sitting in her office on the 14th floor of the Whitmore Biotech Tower, a glass of water on her desk, and a folder open in front of her that she was not supposed to have seen. It had started with a discrepancy. Not even a big one. A line item in a contractor payment that didn't match the internal system record. A difference of about $11,000 that should have been flagged automatically, but somehow wasn't. Elena had only caught it because her CFO, David Park, had sent her a consolidated expenses summary, and she'd been reading it on the treadmill at 6 that morning when something snagged in her brain and wouldn't let go. She'd almost ignored it. She had 70 other things demanding her attention. She hadn't ignored it. By afternoon, she had pulled the full contract history. By 6 o'clock, she had cross-referenced 4 separate vendor accounts and found the same fingerprint running through all of them. Payments routed through shell companies that mapped back, if you followed the chain carefully enough, to a holding group called Meridian Consolidated. She knew that name. Everyone in the biotech industry knew Meridian Consolidated, though most of them pretended they didn't. It was a financial front, elegant on paper, toxic underneath. 3 years ago, a pharmaceutical company in Stuttgart had lost their entire oncology research division when someone sold their proprietary data to Meridian. The case was still in German courts. The company had never recovered. Elena had sat very still at her desk for a long time after she made that connection. Then she'd picked up her phone to call Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale, her security director. 6 years with the company, hired personally by Elena when she was 24 and building the company from its first real office space. She'd trusted him with everything: server access, research protocols, personnel files, emergency protocols. She'd attended his daughter's college graduation last spring. She'd given a toast. She put the phone back down without calling, because Marcus was the one who had approved the original contractor payments. She needed to think before she made a single move. She needed to be careful. Her office door opened. She closed the folder. Marcus Hale walked in with two men Elena didn't recognize. They were not wearing Whitmore biotech badges. One of them had his hand resting very casually near his jacket pocket in a way that was not casual at all. "Elena," Marcus said. His voice was exactly the same as always, steady, professional, the voice of a man who had spent years carefully building trust. "We need to talk about something sensitive." She looked at him. He looked back at her. And in that half second, they both understood that she knew, and he knew she knew, and whatever happened next was going to be very bad. "Sure," she said. "Can you give me 1 minute? I need to forward this email to the board before the end of business." She turned to her computer. Her hands were steady. She had no idea how her hands were steady. She didn't forward an email. She copied the entire contractor file to an encrypted external drive she kept in her desk drawer, the one Marcus didn't know about because she'd installed it herself, quietly, 3 months ago when she'd first started noticing that certain research summaries were disappearing from the internal server with no deletion logs attached. She'd filed that away as a concern without a name. Now it had a name. She pocketed the drive. "Ready?" she said, and stood up. Marcus smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Actually," he said, "I'm going to need that drive in your pocket, Elena." She'd run. That was the whole of it. She'd calculated in about 2 seconds that there was no version of staying in that room that ended well for her, and she'd gone through the private exit behind her bookshelf, the one installed during the building's original construction for exactly the kind of situation no one ever expects to actually need. And she'd taken the stairs and she'd run, and Marcus's men had been faster than she expected, which was how she'd ended up going down a fire escape in the rain, with her shoulder wrecked and her feet bare on wet pavement, and her heart doing something that didn't feel entirely healthy. She leaned against the alley wall now and tried to be rational about her options. Her accounts were frozen. She'd tried to access her banking app on a borrowed phone at the corner store 2 blocks back. The kid behind the counter had looked alarmed when she'd asked, but he'd handed it over. And every account had come back locked. Marcus worked fast. Or whoever was giving Marcus his orders worked fast. Same result either way. Her assistant Priya didn't know what was happening. Neither did the board, or if they did, she had no way of knowing whose side they were on yet. She had one person she could think of who might help. A lawyer named Sandra Cho, who had worked on Whitmore's IP cases for 4 years and was, as far as Elena knew, clean. But Sandra's office was 12 blocks north, and Elena had no phone and no shoes and armed men doing grid searches somewhere behind her. The drive was still in her pocket. That was something. She pressed off the wall and kept moving, heading west, away from downtown, toward the older industrial stretch of the neighborhood where the buildings got lower and the streets got quieter and there were fewer cameras. She didn't have a plan yet. She had a direction and a pulse. She told herself that was enough. Betik. She smelled the repair shop before she saw it. Motor oil and rubber and something metallic. The specific smell of a working garage that seeped out through the ventilation gaps even when the main bay doors were shut. A single light burned above the entrance, yellow and slightly flickering, and a hand-painted sign above the door read, "Bennett's Auto and Repair," in letters that had faded to the point of near illegibility. A smaller sign taped in the window, "Closed. Back 7 a.m." Elena tried the door anyway. It was unlocked. She pushed it open slowly, water dripping off her in a steady stream onto the concrete floor. The shop was dim. The main fluorescent lights were off, but a work lamp on a rolling stand was pulled up near a lifted pickup truck in the far bay, casting a circle of yellow light. Tools were laid out neatly on a rolling cart. The truck's hood was up, and standing beside it, a wrench in one hand, looking at her with the careful lack of expression of a man deciding something quickly, was a man she'd never seen before in her life. He was maybe early 30s, medium height, broad-shouldered, but not in an obvious way, more like someone who'd done real physical work for a long time. Dark hair, a few days of stubble, a gray work shirt with coals stitched above the breast pocket in blue thread, a smear of grease on his forearm. His eyes were the thing that stopped her, not the color, which was just ordinary dark brown, but the way they moved. Quick and specific, taking in the doorway behind her, then her shoulder, then her feet, then her face. Not the way most people looked at things, more like he was building a picture and filing it. He said, "Shop's closed." "I know." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I saw the sign. Door's supposed to be locked." It wasn't. A beat of silence. He looked at her feet, bare, filthy, cut in one spot along the arch where she'd stepped on something in the alley. Then he looked at her shoulder, the way she was holding it. "You need to use the phone," he said. "I can't use a phone right now." Something shifted in his expression. Not suspicion exactly. More like confirmation. Like she'd answered a question he'd already been forming. "Okay," he said, and set the wrench down on the cart. "There's a bathroom in the back. Towels under the sink, first aid kit on the shelf above. Help yourself." She stared at him. "You're not going to ask me what happened?" "Didn't figure you'd tell me the truth yet." He turned back to the truck engine. She stood in the doorway a second longer, rain hammering the roof above her, and tried to figure out what to make of a man who looked at a drenched, injured woman who'd just broken into his closed shop and responded by pointing her toward the towels. She went to the bathroom. "Bosh." It took her about 10 minutes to get her hands to stop shaking enough to properly wrap the bandage around her shoulder. The kit in the shop was well stocked, better than it needed to be for a repair shop, she thought, noting the trauma dressing and the antiseptic wash alongside the standard Band-Aids and gauze. She cleaned the cut on her foot, which was shallow enough that it didn't need stitching, but stung like hell. She dried her face and pulled her hair back with a rubber band she found on the edge of the sink. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the basin. She looked terrible. Not in an interesting way. Just tired and scared and slightly gray. Like someone who'd been running on adrenaline for 3 hours and was starting to feel the bill coming due. "Get it together," she told herself. The reflection looked unconvinced. When she came back out, the man, Cole, was sitting on a metal stool beside the truck with a mug of something hot, a second mug on the workbench near him. He didn't gesture toward it, just left it there. She walked over and picked it up. Coffee, black. "Thank you," she said. "Yep." She leaned against the workbench and looked at the truck. It was a late model F250, had clearly been through something difficult. The left quarter panel was crumpled, and the frame underneath showed stress fractures that would need serious attention. "Whose truck?" she said. "Guy down the street. Took a concrete divider at about 40. Everyone okay?" He was. His fence wasn't. He picked up his coffee. "Your shoulder dislocated or just bruised?" She blinked. "How did you—" "The way you hold it, dislocated would be lower. That's a bruised AC joint, probably. Hurts worse than it sounds. You'll want ice." He reached past her without ceremony and opened a small refrigerator under the bench, pulled out an ice pack and held it out. She took it and pressed it to her shoulder, and the relief was immediate and embarrassing. "Were you a doctor?" she said. "No." "But you know about AC joints. You learn things." He went back to the truck and picked up a small flashlight, angled it into the engine compartment. Conversation apparently over. Elena looked around the shop. A child's drawing was taped to the side of the tool cabinet. A stick figure family, 2 people, and one smaller one, with a house and what was probably a dog or possibly a very round horse. Underneath it, in careful, oversized letters, "Me and Daddy and Rosie." The third figure, the small one, was labeled "Me." The taller figure was labeled "Daddy." The second adult figure, slightly off to the side, had been drawn and then mostly erased, though not completely. You could still see the ghost of pencil lines. She looked away. "I'm Elena," she said. "Cole." "I know, the shirt." He glanced down at the stitching. "Right." "I'm not going to lie to you and say this is a normal situation," she said, "because you clearly already know it isn't, and I think you deserve that much honesty at least." He lowered the flashlight and looked at her properly for the first time since she'd come back out of the bathroom. "All right," he said. There are people looking for me. They're probably not far behind. If you want to tell me to leave, I understand that. This isn't your problem." Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain intensified again, drumming hard on the metal roof. "How many?" he said. She paused. "At least 3 that I saw. Possibly more coordinating off-site." "Armed?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something mildly inconvenient, the way someone might react to being told there was a 20-minute wait at a restaurant they liked. "There's a back room," he said. "It's got a lock and no windows that face the street. There's a cot. My daughter uses it sometimes when she's here with me. You should go back there and stay quiet." Elena felt something tighten in her throat. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "I could be—" "You're not," he said, and turned back to the engine. "How do you know that? People running from something bad they did don't usually stop to ask if you want them to leave." He reached into the engine compartment with the flashlight. "Go to the back room, Elena. I'll let you know if something changes." She stood there another second, wanting, for some reason she couldn't entirely identify, to say something more than she had words for right now. She went to the back room. "All that, we got it." She didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the cot with the ice pack against her shoulder and the drive in her lap and tried to think clearly about what she actually had. The files she'd copied contained 3 months of payment records, the shell company registrations, and, most importantly, an internal memo from 2 weeks ago that she'd almost deleted as a spam filter error before something had made her click it open. The memo was brief and used language that was just oblique enough to have plausible deniability, but the meaning was clear. A scheduled transfer of research data, a reference to a contact at MC, Meridian Consolidated, and a sign-off that she'd recognized immediately because she'd seen that signature on 100 internal documents. Marcus Hales. But there was a second signature below it. She'd looked at that second name for a long time before the implications fully assembled themselves. Richard Sato, Whitmore Biotech's chief science officer, the man who had been with the company since its founding, who had co-developed 3 of their most significant patents, who Elena had always considered one of the few people in the building she could genuinely trust. 6 years of security access, 7 years of proprietary research access. Between the 2 of them, they had the keys to everything. She pressed the heel of her palm against her eyes. This was the part that felt less like a business problem and more like a wound, not the fact that they'd betrayed her, because intellectually she understood that people did things for money and self-interest and 100 other reasons. It was the sheer length of it, the time span, every lunch meeting, every late-night strategy session, every moment she'd thought she was building something alongside people who cared about it the way she did. The sound came from the front of the shop, not the rain. Something deliberate under the rain, a vehicle slowing, then stopping. The low murmur of a voice. Elena was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. She pressed her ear to the door. Couldn't make out words, but she could hear Cole's voice. Steady and unremarkable, the voice of a man who'd been interrupted while working late. And then another voice, harder, asking something. She held her breath. Cole's voice again, still the same register, cooperative, slightly bored. Nothing in it to suggest that there was anything in this shop except a truck, with a crumpled quarter panel, and a mechanic who wanted to get back to his work. A long pause. The second voice again, shorter this time. Footsteps on the concrete outside, moving away. Then the sound of a car door, an engine, the vehicle pulling off. Elena let her breath out in a controlled, silent exhale that left her hands trembling slightly. She waited 5 minutes before she opened the door. Cole was at the workbench, his back to her, cleaning a socket wrench with a shop rag. He didn't turn around. "They're gone for now," he said. "But they'll circle back. They're doing a sweep pattern, about 8 blocks. He set the wrench down. "You should probably tell me what's actually going on." Elena looked at him, this man in his gray work shirt with grease on his arm, who had just turned away armed men with the casual confidence of someone who found the situation merely inconvenient and made a decision. "Okay," she said, "but it's going to take a while." "I've got time," Cole said. "Truck's not going anywhere tonight." He pulled a second stool up to the workbench without looking at her, and went back to what he was doing. And Elena sat down across from him in the yellow work lamp light, with the rain hammering the roof and the drive in her pocket, and men who wanted her silence still circling somewhere out in the dark. And she started talking. She talked for almost 40 minutes. Cole didn't interrupt, didn't ask clarifying questions while she was mid-thought, didn't reach for his phone or check the clock or do any of the things that most people did when they were getting more information than they'd bargained for. He just worked, slowly, methodically, cleaning and re-oiling tools and setting them back in their designated places on the cart, and listened with the particular quality of attention that Elena was starting to realize was not a common thing. It wasn't polite attention, the kind where someone nods at intervals and waits for you to finish so they can respond. It was the kind of attention that actually went somewhere. She could feel it. She told him about the contractor discrepancy, the shell companies, Meridian Consolidated, the memo with the 2 signatures. She told him about Marcus walking into her office with those 2 men and the specific way his hand had been resting near his jacket pocket. She told him about the drive and what was on it. She didn't embellish. She'd spent enough time in boardrooms to know that details without decoration landed harder than dramatic presentation. And she needed this man, whoever he was, to understand the weight of what she was carrying and not dismiss it as something she'd misread. When she finished, the shop was quiet except for the rain and the distant rumble of a truck somewhere on the main road. Cole set down the last wrench and picked up his coffee. He looked at the floor for a moment. "Richard Sato," he said, "the CSO. How long has he been in that position?" 7 years. He was with me from the beginning." "And Hale? 6 years, you said. When did the contractor irregularities start?" She'd thought about this. "Based on the earliest records I found, about 14 months ago. So they weren't recruited, they were turned. Something changed 14 months ago that made it worth their while." He looked at her. "You have any idea what that would have been?" "I've been trying to work that out. 14 months ago, we filed the patents on our 3rd-generation cellular repair compound. It's the most significant thing we've ever developed. The applications they're enormous. Cancer treatment, regenerative medicine, potentially neurological repair. The research community has known it was coming for about 2 years, but the actual compound specifications were finalized 14 months ago. And whoever runs Meridian Consolidated wanted it. They don't just want to buy it. If they wanted to buy it, they would have approached us through proper channels. What they're doing is theft, extracting the data so they can manufacture it independently, file their own patents in jurisdictions where ours won't be recognized, and cut us out entirely." She pressed her palm flat against the workbench. "And if I'm silenced before I can present that evidence to the board, they control the narrative. They'll say I mismanaged funds, that I became unstable, that I tried to sabotage the company when I felt I was losing control. Marcus has been in that building long enough to make that story stick." Cole turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "You have board members you trust?" "Honestly, right now I don't know. 3 hours ago I would have given you a confident answer. Now I can't be sure who's seen what, who Marcus has been working on over the past year, what they've been told." She exhaled. "I have a lawyer, Sandra Cho. She's handled our IP litigation for 4 years, and she's not connected to any internal systems in a way Marcus could have accessed. If I can get to her, what time does she get in?" "Early. She's usually at her office by 7:30. Cole checked the clock on the wall. It was 1:14 in the morning, 6 hours and change. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Elena looked at him. "That's all you've got?" "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Most people would have more questions. Or tell me this sounds insane, or ask me why I'm telling all of this to a mechanic I met 40 minutes ago." "It doesn't sound insane," he said simply. "And I already told you why you're telling me. You don't have anyone else right now." He stood and carried his mug to the small sink. "You should try to get some sleep. I'll keep an eye on the street." "I'm not going to be able to sleep." "You probably won't," he agreed. "Try anyway. Your brain's running on stress chemicals right now, and it's going to start making bad decisions if you don't rest it." She stared at him. "You're very matter-of-fact about all of this." He looked at her over his shoulder with an expression that was almost amused, but not quite. "Would you prefer I panic?" "No," she admitted. "Then get some rest, Elena." She went back to the small room, lay down on the cot without expecting anything, and was asleep in under 8 minutes. She didn't know that Cole sat on a stool near the front window for the next 3 hours with a clear line of sight to the street, watching the sweep pattern repeat itself twice, tracking the headlights and the timing and the gaps, and never once picking up a book or his phone or doing anything to pass the time except watch. Just watch. The way someone does when watching is the whole job, and they've done it long enough that it doesn't feel like effort anymore. It feels like breathing. The rain finally eased around 4 in the morning. By then he had the pattern memorized. Elena woke at 5:40 to the smell of something cooking. She lay still for a moment, oriented herself. The cot, the bare ceiling, the muffled sound of a radio playing low somewhere nearby, and then sat up. Her shoulder was stiff and deep aching in a way that was going to be with her for days. The cut on her foot had stuck to the bandage overnight. She peeled it free with her teeth gritted and stood carefully. When she came out, Cole was at a small camping stove near the back of the shop with a pan going. Eggs, from the smell. His daughter was sitting on the workbench watching him with the casual comfort of a child who'd spent a lot of time in this space. Maybe 7 years old, dark-haired like her father, wearing overalls over a striped shirt and sneakers with the laces untied because she'd clearly attempted it herself and given up halfway through. She had a crayon in one hand and a coloring book in her lap, and was paying about equal attention to both the eggs and the page she was working on. The child noticed Elena first. She looked at her with the direct, unselfconscious assessment that children did before the world taught them. It was rude. "Hi," the girl said. "Hi," Elena said. "I'm Rosie. I'm 7. My dad said you hurt your shoulder. Does it hurt a lot?" "A fair amount, yeah." Rosie nodded with great seriousness. "My dad hurt his shoulder once. He didn't tell me how bad it was, but I could tell because he made a face when he thought I wasn't looking." Cole glanced back at his daughter briefly. "She's very observant." "I am," Rosie confirmed without false modesty. Cole scraped the eggs onto 2 mismatched plates, one for Elena, one apparently already set aside for Rosie, and handed Elena's across with a fork. "I called Mrs. Adkins next door. She's going to take Rosie to school today." Rosie's expression shifted to mild protest. "I could stay here." "You could," Cole said in the tone of a man who'd navigated this exact position before, "but you're not going to." "But what if Rosie?" The single word carried no sharpness, just a kind of calm finality that apparently operated as its own language between the two of them, because Rosie closed the coloring book and slid off the workbench without further argument, though she did shoot Elena a look that communicated something between sympathy and conspiracy. Elena ate the eggs standing at the workbench. They were plain, just salt, maybe a little butter, and she was so hungry that they tasted like the best thing she'd eaten in a month. A small knock at the back door at 6:15. Mrs. Adkins turned out to be a stout woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the practiced efficiency of someone who'd helped out in these logistics many times before. She took one look at Elena, took one look at Cole, and had the decency to simply say good morning and ask Rosie if she'd brushed her teeth. Rosie had not brushed her teeth. There was a 2-minute interruption while this was resolved. Then Rosie came back, hugged Cole around the middle with her face pressed into his shirt. "Bye, Daddy. Love you." And submitted to having her laces tied before being collected and swept out the door. Cole watched until the door closed, then turned back to the shop. Something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly when the door clicked shut. Not sadness exactly, more like a man recalibrating, moving from one mode to another. "She's great," Elena said. She meant it. "She's 7. 7 is a good age." He picked up his own plate. "You said your lawyer gets in at 7:30. "Usually, yes." "Her office is where?" "Northwest 23rd. 12 blocks north, maybe a mile east of here." Cole was quiet, finishing his food. Then, "The team that came through last night did 2 passes. The gaps in their sweep are consistent. They're working on a fixed radius from your last known phone location, so they're covering a lot of ground, but not efficiently. Between 7:10 and 7:35 this morning, the eastern quadrant is going to have about a 12-minute window where coverage is thin." Elena set down her fork. "You tracked their sweep pattern." "Habit," he said, and he said it in a way that clearly didn't invite follow-up. She followed up anyway. "Cole? Who are you?" He looked at her steadily. A mechanic. You've been running the sleep deprivation math in your head for 6 hours while monitoring a professional security team's grid search, and now you're pulling 12-minute gap windows out of nowhere. So, who are you? A long pause. He took a drink of his coffee. Someone who used to be something else, he said, and isn't anymore, and doesn't want to be. She held his gaze. He didn't look away, but he also didn't elaborate, and she understood from his face that this was not a wall she was going to break down in this conversation, and possibly not in any conversation soon. Okay, she said. Okay. He set his plate down. We need to get you something else to wear. What you've got on will make you identifiable from 50 yards away. He looked at her blazer. Expensive charcoal wool, now dry but unmistakably expensive in the way that stood out. I've got a jacket in the truck, and there's a lost and found box in the back room. Not going to be pretty. I don't need pretty. Good. He was already moving. Shoes are going to be the problem. The lost and found box produced a hooded sweatshirt in dark green that was 2 sizes too big and a pair of worn canvas sneakers that were half a size too small but functionally wearable. Cole gave her his own jacket over the sweatshirt, olive drab, plain, the kind that nobody looked at twice, and pulled the hood up over her hair. He looked at her critically. Better, he said. You're not coming with me, she said. It wasn't a question. Wasn't planning to not come with you. Cole, your lawyer's office is a mile away, and there are armed men between here and there who already knocked on my door once last night. You're going to walk into that building in borrowed shoes with a bad shoulder and a drive full of evidence, and you need someone to run interference if something goes wrong. He picked up his keys, then set them back down. Too identifiable, the truck. We walk. That 12-minute window is in 45 minutes. We should move in 30. She looked at him for a long moment. He was already checking the back door, looking at the alley, thinking about route. Not asking for her agreement exactly, but not bulldozing past it either. Just proceeding in the way of a man who'd already done the calculation and arrived at a conclusion. You have a daughter, she said. I'm aware. I'm serious, Cole. If something happens to you because of my... But nothing's going to happen. Mom. He said it flatly, without the bravado that would have made it sound empty, more like a man stating a thing he'd considered and found probably true. And we're losing time talking about it. She wanted to argue more. She didn't, because he was right, and also because somewhere in the past 7 hours she had developed a degree of trust in this man's judgment that she couldn't entirely account for, but also couldn't dismiss. They moved out the back door at 6:58. The morning was gray and still damp, the streets beginning to register the first shift of traffic. Delivery trucks, a few early commuters, a woman walking a very small dog with great seriousness of purpose. Cole walked alongside Elena without touching her, keeping slightly to her left and a half step back in a way that was probably deliberate but looked casual. He'd put on a plain dark cap. He looked like someone heading to a job site. He also looked, she noticed, at every intersection before they crossed it. Not nervously, just checked, noted, moved on. It was the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't paying attention, and most people wouldn't pay attention. They were 5 blocks out when Cole said quietly, "Don't change your pace." And she felt rather than heard the shift in his attention. He'd seen something. Southeast corner, he said, still not looking at it directly. Gray sedan, 2 people inside, engine running. She kept walking. That's one of theirs? Plates are from a rental. Engine's warm. They've been there a while. A beat. We're going to go right at the next block instead of straight. That takes us 2 blocks further from Sandra's building. Yeah, but it takes us away from the gray sedan. She turned right. He was already beside her, pace unchanged. They see us? She said. Driver looked up when we came around the corner. He's on the radio now. A pause. We need to move faster. They moved faster, not running. Cole's hand closed briefly around her elbow, and he steered her into a doorway as a second vehicle swept past on the cross street, neither of them speaking, both of them flat against the glass of what turned out to be a closed dry cleaner's. She could see her own reflection. She looked like she was holding together with staples. Cole was watching the mirror angled on the corner storefront across the street. She didn't ask how he'd already cataloged that the mirror was there. "Okay," he said. They didn't stop. Move. They came out of the doorway, and he took them through a side alley that ran parallel to the main street, which cut 2 blocks off the detour. And then they were on Northwest 23rd, and she could see Sandra's building, a converted Victorian, recently renovated with a small, tasteful sign, CHO Law Partners. Third-floor lights were already on. "She's here," Elena said. "Good." Cole was still watching the street behind them. "Go. I'll be at the door." "Cole?" "Go, Elena." She went. The building's front door was unlocked during business hours. Sandra had always kept an open-door policy for walk-ins during the morning. Elena took the stairs rather than the elevator, favoring speed over her shoulder's objections, and came out on the 3rd floor to find a receptionist who looked barely 20 and startled badly when a woman in a green sweatshirt and borrowed shoes burst through the stairwell door. "I need to see Sandra Cho," Elena said. "Right now. It's an emergency." "Do you have an Tell her Elena Whitmore is here. Tell her exactly that." The receptionist picked up the phone, spoke into it in a low voice. A pause. Then, from the inner office, "Send her in." Sandra Cho was 53 years old, Korean-American, built like someone who'd run marathons well into her 40s and hadn't entirely stopped, with reading glasses perpetually somewhere on or near her head and an expression of calibrated calm that Elena had always found immensely reassuring in a courtroom, and found now, standing in her doorway, looking like something the storm had deposited, more reassuring than anything she could name. Sandra looked at her for about 2 seconds, took in the shoes, the sweatshirt, the shoulder. "Close the door," Sandra said. Elena closed it. "Sit down and tell me everything, and don't leave anything out because you think it'll slow you down." Elena sat. She pulled the drive from her pocket and set it on the desk between them. "I need you to look at what's on here first," Elena said, "because I need you to know that I'm not being paranoid or reactive before I tell you the rest." Sandra looked at the drive, then at Elena's face, then picked up the drive and plugged it into her laptop without a word. It took her 11 minutes to read through the files. Elena sat and listened to the city outside and tried not to let her hands clench in her lap. When Sandra looked up, her expression had not dramatically changed, but her eyes were very sharp. "Richard Sato," Sandra said. "Yes. I've sat across from that man at 3 different contract negotiations." She took off her glasses and set them on the desk. "He testified for us in the Kellerman patent dispute, under oath." "I know." "And Marcus Hale." "Yes." Sandra tapped 2 fingers against her desk. It was the only sign she gave of what was probably a significant internal recalibration. "The memo is enough, not to prosecute, not yet, but enough to file an emergency injunction against any asset movements or executive decisions pending investigation, and enough to get the board's independent auditors in there by end of business today if I move right now." She was already reaching for her phone. "Who else knows you're here?" "One other person. He's downstairs." Sandra paused, hand on the phone. "Who?" "His name is Cole Bennett. He helped me get here." "How much does he know?" "Everything. All of it." Sandra studied her. "And you trust him?" It wasn't really a question, but Elena considered it seriously anyway. The yellow work lamp, the carefully set out tools, the specific way he'd listened, the child's drawing on the cabinet, the 12 minutes. "Yes," she said. "I trust him." Sandra nodded once, like that was sufficient information, and dialed. Elena let out a breath she'd been holding since 11 o'clock the night before. Her shoulder ached, her feet hurt. She was wearing someone else's jacket, and she was going to need a new phone, and her accounts were frozen, and the 2 people she'd trusted most at her company had been systematically dismantling everything she'd built for over a year. But the drive was in the right hands now, and Sandra was on the phone, using the particular voice she used when she was about to do something legally irreversible. And outside the window, Portland was fully awake and gray and unglamorous and going about its morning. Elena pressed her back against the chair and closed her eyes for just a moment. Downstairs, Cole Bennett stood at the building's front entrance with one hand in his jacket pocket and his eyes on the street. Tracking the gray sedan that had repositioned itself 2 blocks north, and was trying very hard to look like it wasn't watching a Victorian office building on Northwest 23rd. He counted the seconds between radio checks based on the subtle shifts in the driver's posture. He noted the position of the second man in the passenger seat and the angle of their sightline. He'd been out of that life for 4 years. He'd left it deliberately, with both hands, and he'd never once looked back. Not really, not in any way that counted. He kept his eyes on the street and waited. And somewhere underneath the practiced stillness of a man who had learned to be very good at waiting, something that had been quiet for a long time was paying very close attention to everything around it. Just in case. Just because that's what it did. Even when he'd told it not to. Even when he'd packed it into a box and labeled it the past and tried to leave it there. It watched. It calculated. It stayed ready. He thought about Rosie brushing her teeth. He thought about the eggs on the camping stove. He thought about the simple, ordinary morning it was supposed to have been. The sedan's driver shifted in his seat and picked up his radio again. Cole watched and waited and did not move. The sedan moved at 8:17. Cole watched it pull away from the curb with the deliberate unhurriedness of a vehicle whose occupants had received new instructions and were trying not to broadcast that fact. It turned north at the intersection, not south, away from the building, not toward it. That was the tell. A surveillance team pulling back didn't turn toward their target. They turned away and repositioned, which meant someone had decided that sitting visible on the street was no longer the right play, which meant someone had figured out where Elena was. Cole pushed off the doorframe and went inside. He took the stairs 2 at a time, not running but close, and came through the 3rd-floor door to find the young receptionist half standing from her chair with an expression that suggested this morning was not what she'd signed up for when she took the job. "Third door," she said, apparently deciding he looked like someone who already knew where he was going. He did. He knocked twice and opened it without waiting. Sandra Cho was on the phone. Elena was sitting across from her, and she looked up when Cole came in with an alertness that told him she'd been listening for exactly this, the sound of something going wrong. "The sedan moved," he said. "They repositioned. Someone told them where you are." Sandra lowered the phone slowly. "I've been calling from my office line," she said, and the way she said it told Cole she'd already worked out the implication. "Is this line monitored?" he asked. "It shouldn't be. But if Hale has been building this operation for 14 months, he could have flagged Sandra's number," Elena said. She was already standing. "If he ran my contacts list, Sandra would be in the top 5 people I'd call in an emergency." "How long ago did you start calling?" Cole asked Sandra. "About 20 minutes. 20 minutes was enough time to trace a call origin, cross-reference with street-level assets, and redirect a team. These people were professional, and they had infrastructure. That much had been clear from the sweep pattern the night before. This wasn't Marcus Hale running a 2-man operation out of a parking garage. There was real organizational weight behind this. "Is there a back exit?" Cole said. "Service stairs, ground floor, opens to the alley on the building's north side." Sandra was already pulling her laptop from the desk, the drive still in its port. She ejected it cleanly and held it out to Elena. Elena took it. "Sandra, you read what's on here." "I remember everything I read," Sandra said, in the tone of a woman who had built a 20-year career on exactly that fact. "I don't need the physical copy to file the injunction. What I need is about 90 minutes at my desk and for the 2 of you to be somewhere that is not here." She was reaching for her jacket. "I'm going to my associate's office on the east side. They don't have that address. Give me 3 hours." "And if they come here before you leave?" Elena said. Sandra looked at her over the rim of her glasses with an expression that was not quite amusement, but was adjacent to it. "Elena, I've spent 20 years in courtrooms with people who were trying to destroy my clients' lives through legitimate legal channels. This is just the illegal version. I know how to handle people who want to intimidate me." She picked up a second phone, a personal cell, not the office line, and held it up. "New number. I'll text you when it's done. Now go." Cole was already at the door. Elena followed, and they went through it without looking back, because looking back in situations like this was a habit that cost seconds you couldn't get back. The service stairs were narrow and poorly lit and smelled like old building, concrete and paint, and the particular staleness of a space that existed purely for utility. Cole went first, one hand on the rail, listening to the stairwell below them as they descended. Nothing. They came out through a heavy door into the north alley, and the morning hit them. Gray sky, The smell of wet pavement still rising from last night's rain, the distant compression of a city fully into its workday. Cole checked left first, then right. The alley ran between two buildings and opened at both ends onto cross streets. On the left end, roughly 40 yards away, a white panel van had pulled up and was sitting with its hazards on in the casual, convincing way of a vehicle making a delivery. The side door faced the alley entrance. Right, Cole said. They went right. 30 yards of alley, another street, and Cole turned them immediately into the nearest open door, which happened to be the service entrance of a small grocery that was just beginning its morning stocking. A teenage employee looked up from a dolly stacked with produce boxes and made the reasonable decision that whatever this was, it was not his problem. Cole moved them through the store to the front entrance, came out onto the street, and stopped. He needed to think for 10 seconds, and he took them. The problem was straightforward in its shape and complex in its solution. They were two people on foot in a neighborhood that was being actively searched by a team that had vehicles and communications and the significant advantage of being able to replace their own people with fresh assets. Cole and Elena had none of those things. What they had was the fact that it was now fully morning rush, which meant foot traffic and noise and visual clutter, all of which reduced the effectiveness of a search team because there were too many bodies to sort through quickly. "We can't go back to the shop," he said. "I know. They'll have it flagged by now. If they ran your route last night, they'll know I ended up somewhere in this neighborhood, and the shop is the most obvious shelter point." She was keeping up with his reasoning, which he noted. "Do you have somewhere else?" He thought about it honestly. He had 3 options, and none of them were clean. "My teammate," he said. "Former. He lives about 2 miles east, if he's home." He paused. "We haven't talked in 8 months." Elena looked at him. "Why not?" "Because I left," Cole said simply. And he didn't understand why. And I didn't explain it well enough. He was already moving east, keeping them on the busy side of the sidewalk. 2 more people in the morning crowd. "His name is Darius Webb. He's not going to be happy to see me." "But he'll help?" Cole considered this with genuine uncertainty rather than false confidence. "Yeah," he said finally. "He'll help. He's built that way. It's the explaining I'm going to have to do afterward that's going to be the problem." He borrowed a phone from a woman at a coffee cart, held up 2 fingers, said, "30 seconds, please," in a way that apparently communicated reliability, because she handed it over without debate, and dialed from memory. 6 rings. Then a voice that was deep and unhappy, and fully awake in the manner of someone who had never quite trusted sleep. "Who's this?" "It's Cole." A silence that had texture to it. "You're calling from a random number at 8 in the morning. I need to come to you, now, me and 1 other person." "Cole, Darius." He kept his voice even. "I need this." Another silence, shorter. "I've got coffee on," Darius said, and hung up. Cole handed the phone back to the woman, who took it with the expression of someone who had witnessed something she didn't quite have context for. "Okay," Elena said. "Okay," Cole said. "We need a cab. Cash. I've got some, not much. And we can't stand on a corner waiting for one, so we walk toward downtown and we flag one moving." "I have cash," Elena said. "Emergency pocket. Jacket lining." She reached into the borrowed jacket, his jacket, and produced a folded-over set of bills from a thin interior slot that he hadn't known was there. She caught his look. "I've had the same tailor for 6 years. She started adding that pocket after I got locked out of my car 3 years ago and had to borrow $20 from a parking attendant. Some lessons you only need to learn once." He almost smiled. Almost. They found a cab 4 blocks east, moving with the morning flow. Cole gave an address 2 blocks from Darius's building rather than the building itself. Habit. And they got in and he watched the rear window the whole way. Nothing followed them. Or if something did, it was good enough that he couldn't spot it, and he'd have spotted it. Darius Webb lived in a 4th-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that had been industrial 20 years ago and was now the kind of place where industrial bones got converted into loft spaces and coffee shops, but slowly and imperfectly, so that welding supply companies still operated beside record stores and the bodega on the corner had been there since 1987 and was not going anywhere. The building's front door code was the same one it had been when Cole had visited last. Darius was predictable in specific ways. and they took the stairs up to 4. Cole knocked. The man who opened the door was 6'3" and had clearly been awake since before the phone call, possibly since before sunrise. Darius Webb was 41 years old, black, with close-cropped hair, going gray at the temples, and the kind of physical presence that didn't announce itself loudly, but was simply there, the way a load-bearing wall was there. He had a coffee mug in one hand and was wearing a gray sweatshirt and jeans, and he looked at Cole with an expression that contained several things at once: irritation, relief, something complicated that didn't have a clean name. Then he looked at Elena, at the borrowed jacket and the canvas sneakers and the way she was holding her shoulder. He stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. The apartment was spare but not empty. The kind of space where everything in it was there because it was needed or because it mattered, nothing decorative for decoration's sake. A bookshelf that was actually being used, a workbench along one wall with tools laid out, a framed photograph on the shelf that Cole recognized without looking at it directly. 8 men in tactical gear squinting into desert sun. He made a point of not looking at it. Darius poured 2 more mugs of coffee without asking and set them on the kitchen counter. "Sit down," he said, to Elena specifically, with the directness of someone who had assessed her shoulder and her pallor and arrived at a conclusion. Elena sat. She wrapped both hands around the mug. Darius looked at Cole. "Talk!" Cole talked. Shorter version than he'd given Elena time to give, because short was what the situation needed right now. Whitmore Biotech, the data theft, Meridian Consolidated, the drive, the lawyers, the extraction operation that was currently running through the neighborhood they'd just left. He didn't editorialize. Just facts, sequence, current status. Darius listened the way Cole had listened the night before, completely, building the picture. When Cole finished, Darius looked at his coffee for a moment. "Meridian Consolidated," he said. "You know it?" "Of it." He set the mug down. "There was some chatter about them 18 months ago. Not in a context I can talk about, but they're not just a financial front, Cole. They have operational capacity. The people they hired to run this aren't freelancers. They'll have a field commander somewhere local who's running the search assets and coordinating with whoever Hale reports to." "I figured," Cole said. "Last night's sweep was too disciplined for contract muscle." "Right," Darius looked at Elena. "The evidence your lawyer has, is it enough?" "For a legal injunction, yes," Elena said. "She's filing it now. But that stops asset movements. It doesn't stop these people from trying to silence the evidence source." She said it plainly, without self-pity, "which is me. So you need to stay invisible until the legal process is far enough along that silencing you stops being useful to them," Darius said. "Essentially." He nodded slowly. Then he looked at Cole again, and something passed between them that was old and knotted and wasn't going to get resolved in this kitchen, but also wasn't going to be allowed to be an obstacle right now. "I have a safe house," Darius said. "Not official, mine. About 40 minutes out of the city, off the main routes. Nobody knows about it except, well, a few people." He glanced at Cole. "You didn't know about it?" "No," Cole said. "I bought it after you left. Seemed like a reasonable thing to have." He said it without accusation, but also without hiding what was underneath it, which was that Cole leaving had made Darius understand certain things about the value of having contingencies. Cole absorbed that without defending himself. He wasn't sure he had a defense. "There's one problem," Darius said. "Getting there. If they have vehicle assets and they've flagged Cole's truck, they have the truck," Cole said. "I'm assuming they've been at the shop since this morning. Then we take mine. But I want to run a route check first. Give me 20 minutes. He was already moving toward the back of the apartment. Elena waited until Darius was out of earshot, then said quietly, "He's like you." "He's nothing like me," Cole said. "He's better at it. Always was." She looked at him. "That doesn't bother you?" Why would it? She considered this. Most men would have a thing about admitting that. "Most men would be wasting energy," Cole said. He picked up his coffee. "Darius Webb pulled a 4-man team out of a collapsed building in conditions I don't want to describe to you, and he did it without losing a single one of them. I know what he's capable of. I'd rather know that and use it than pretend otherwise." Elena was quiet for a moment. "What happened?" she said. "Why did you leave?" He didn't answer immediately. She didn't push, just held the question in the air between them with patience that he hadn't expected from her. Maybe that was unfair. He'd seen her sit through 4 hours of fear and physical pain without once collapsing into it. Patience probably came naturally to someone built that way. My daughter's mother left when Rosie was 18 months old, he said finally. Couldn't do it anymore. The deployments, the uncertainty, not knowing when I'd be home or if I'd be home. I don't blame her. I understood it. But it meant Rosie had nobody if something happened to me. He looked at the window. I came back from a mission in March of that year, and Rosie had learned to walk while I was gone. She was taking these small, ridiculous steps across the living room floor, and she had this expression on her face like she had no idea it was a big deal. Just absolute confidence, like of course she was walking, what else would she be doing? And my neighbor, Mrs. Adkins, she'd been watching her, she was crying a little, because she'd seen it and I hadn't. He stopped. I put in my papers the following week. Elena said nothing. She didn't fill the silence with sympathy or reasonable observations about sacrifice, and he was grateful for that. The silence was the right response. Darius thought I was running, Cole said. Maybe I was, but I think there's a difference between running from something and running towards something. I'm still not entirely sure which one it was. Do you regret it? She asked. He thought about Rosie at the workbench this morning with her untied shoes and her coloring book. Not once, he said. Not for a single minute. Darius came back with a tablet and a route map. There's a checkpoint being run on the I-84 East ramp, he said, which made Cole's jaw tighten. Not police. Private contractor vehicles using traffic management cover. Someone is putting serious resources into this. He set the tablet on the counter. We go surface roads. Longer, but they can't grid surface roads without burning every asset they have. I've got a window. Traffic camera maintenance cycle hits the Oak Street corridor between 9:40 and 10:15. We move in that window. You already had the camera cycle, Cole said. I know this city. Why do you know the camera maintenance cycle for Oak Street? Because I'm thorough, Darius said, with the particular flatness that was his version of humor. They had 40 minutes. Darius made eggs. Proper ones this time, with things in them. And the three of them ate at the kitchen counter with the kind of functional silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just people refueling before the next thing. Elena asked Darius about the bookshelf, and he told her about the history books. American military history mostly, a few biographies, one shelf of dense economic theory that looked untouched but wasn't. She asked about one of the titles, and he gave her a 2-sentence summary that was genuinely insightful, and she responded in a way that told Cole she'd read the author's other work. And for about 4 minutes, they had a conversation that had nothing to do with any of this, and it was the most normal 4 minutes of the morning. Then Darius's watch alarm went off, and they left. His vehicle was a dark blue SUV, mid-range, the kind that populated every parking lot in the city and registered as nothing. Elena got in the back. Cole took passenger. Darius drove with the precise, unhurried competence of someone who'd driven in situations where the cost of error was not a fender bender. They made it 6 blocks before the first tail appeared. Black pickup, 3 back, Darius said. He hadn't checked his mirror, obviously. Been with us since Burnside. Cole confirmed it in the side mirror without turning his head. Single occupant. He's keeping distance, but the spacing is too consistent. That's deliberate. I know. Darius took a left that wasn't on the planned route. The pickup followed, adding distance now, which meant the driver knew he'd been spotted and was adjusting, which meant he was communicating their position to assets ahead of them. They're going to box us, Cole said. That was always the risk on surface roads. Darius was absolutely calm in the way of someone who had moved past the alarm stage of this kind of situation a long time ago and now just lived in the response stage. Options. Cole thought fast and didn't love any of what he came up with. Direct confrontation was off the table. Elena in the vehicle, civilian population around them, and these people had already demonstrated they weren't working with restraint as a primary concern. Running the box required knowing where the box was being set up, and they didn't have full information, which left disruption. Break the coordination without a direct engagement. His radio, Cole said. If we can take him off the air, they lose real-time location. Buys us 4 or 5 minutes of confusion while they try to reestablish. How? Cole looked at the street ahead. Next block there's a parking structure, 2-level. If we go in and immediately up to the roof, he follows us in. We're in an enclosed space, Darius said. He follows us in. There's no radio signal in a concrete structure, Cole said. 3 levels of poured concrete. His communication goes dead the second he drives into that ground floor. We come out the back exit on Hoyt before he realizes we've broken contact. Darius considered this for roughly 2 seconds. Back exit on Hoyt requires a gate card. Cole looked at him. Darius reached into the center console without taking his eyes off the road and produced a white card on a lanyard. I have a monthly spot in there, he said. For the record, I do have a normal life. Nobody said you didn't. You were thinking it. They turned into the parking structure. The pickup hesitated at the entrance, a flash of the driver's face through the windshield calculating, and then followed them in. Cole was right about the signal. He watched the pickup's driver reach for his radio 3 seconds into the ground floor and then do the specific thing people did when they realized they'd lost communication. Check the radio, tap it, realize it wasn't the radio's fault. The confusion bought them the ramp. Darius went up, came around the first level turn, then instead of going to the roof, he went back down the other side via the exit lane. A move that worked in this structure because of the split-level design, entry, and exit on opposite sides. The pickup was somewhere on the level above them. Darius swiped the card at the Hoyt Street gate, and they came out into daylight heading east while the driver upstairs was probably still looking for them on the roof. 4 minutes, Darius said. Maybe 5. He drove steadily, no urgency visible, and took them through 3 more turns before settling onto a surface road heading southeast that would eventually bring them to the outer routes. Nobody followed. Elena let out a breath in the back seat. Is it always like this with you two? She said. No, Cole said. Occasionally worse, Darius said. Cole glanced at him. Darius's mouth had shifted slightly, the first break in his composure all morning, and it was the particular expression of someone who was still irritated about something but had decided that shared absurdity was more relevant right now. 8 months, Darius said, eyes on the road. I know. You could have called. I know. 8 months is a long time, Cole. I know, Darius. A pause. The shop doing okay? Something in Cole's chest unknotted a fraction. Yeah, it's doing okay. Rosie? She's great. 7's a good age, Darius nodded, and that was apparently the entire reconciliation because he didn't push further and Cole didn't elaborate and the road ahead was clear and open and leading somewhere safer than where they'd been, and that was enough for right now. Some things between people who had been through significant things together didn't require lengthy processing. They required presence and forward motion, and they had both. Elena's borrowed phone, she'd taken it from Sandra's receptionist with the promise of returning it, which felt increasingly optimistic, buzzed in her pocket. She looked at it. A text from an unknown number. Sandra's new line. 2 words. Injunction filed. She read it twice, then a 3rd time. Sandra filed the injunction, she said. Cole turned to look at her. When? Just now, which means she was working through the legal mechanics, Elena fast, the way she did when the details aligned. Asset freeze is automatic once it hits the court system. Marcus can't move company funds, can't transfer data, can't execute any significant transactions without triggering a contempt violation. And once the court has the filing, the evidence is in the record. It's not just on this drive anymore. It's in a federal filing, which changes the calculation for the people running this operation, Darius said. Silencing you stops the testimony, not the record. Exactly. It's not... They could still come after me, but the primary leverage point they had is gone. The evidence exists without me now. The road opened up ahead of them, the city thinning into wider blocks and lower buildings. The sky doing something tentative with the clouds that might eventually become actual sunlight. Does that mean we're safe? Elena asked. Safer, Cole said. He didn't dress it up, which she had come to expect from him and was starting to find, strangely, more comforting than reassurance would have been. People who've invested this much in an operation don't just stop because the legal picture changed. They reassess, but reassessment takes time. How much time? Enough, he said, and turned back to the road ahead. What he didn't say, because it wasn't useful yet, and she already had enough to carry, was that he'd been running a secondary problem in the back of his mind for the past hour and hadn't been able to resolve it. The operations level of organization, the speed of their response, the private contractor vehicles on the interstate ramp. These weren't things that Marcus Hale and Richard Sato had put together from inside a biotech company, no matter how much access they had. Someone above them was running this. Someone who had security infrastructure already built, already deployed, already capable of this kind of rapid response in a city they may not have had assets in 72 hours ago. Meridian Consolidated was not just a financial entity. Darius had confirmed that, and whoever was at the top of that organization had decided that what was on that drive was worth more than the cost of what they were doing to get it. That person was still out there. The injunction complicated things for them. It didn't eliminate them. Cole looked out at the road and noted the exits and thought about Rosie at school right now, probably in math class, probably ahead of the other kids because she'd always been ahead, probably borrowing someone else's crayons because she'd left hers in the shop again. He thought about the fact that this morning had started as a normal morning and was now something else entirely, and that the something else had followed him home to his real life in a way that most of the something else's from his old life never had. He thought about the drive in Elena's pocket and the names on the memo, and the fact that somewhere in this city there was a person whose name they didn't have yet who had decided to burn Elena Whitmore's life down for the contents of a research file. And that person had not yet been found, and would not quietly accept being found. The safe house was 40 minutes away. Cole counted them one at a time. The safe house was a property that didn't look like anything. That was the point, Darius explained without much ceremony when they pulled off the county road and down a gravel track that was easy to miss if you didn't know to look for the gap in the tree line. A one-story structure, wood-sided, the kind of place that read as a weekend hunting cabin from the road, which it had been originally before Darius had bought it from an estate sale 18 months ago and quietly made it into something else. The exterior was unchanged. The interior had been reinforced in ways that weren't visible unless you knew what to look for, and the generator in the back shed was large enough to run the place independently for 2 weeks. "You built all this yourself?" Elena asked, standing in the main room while Darius opened windows to clear the stale air. "Mostly. Web construction was a family business before it was anything else." He said it without particular sentiment. "My grandfather built houses. My father built houses. I spent summers doing it before I enlisted. Turns out the skills transfer." Cole walked the perimeter of the house without comment, checking the sight lines from each window, noting the tree coverage on the north and east sides, the open ground to the south that would make approach from that direction visible from inside. He did it automatically, the way other people checked their phone when they walked into a new room. He was aware of it, and he was aware that both Darius and Elena were aware of it, and none of them said anything. The borrowed phone had 2 more texts from Sandra by the time they settled. The first confirmed the injunction had been formally docketed at 9:52 a.m. The second was longer. The court had contacted Whitmore Biotech's board of directors notifying them of the filing, which triggered the company's independent audit protocol, a provision Elena had apparently written into the corporate charter herself 4 years ago because she'd been the kind of 26-year-old CEO who thought about what would happen if she herself turned out to be wrong about someone she trusted. The auditors would be in the building by noon. Elena read this text twice and then set the phone down on the kitchen table and sat there for a moment with her hands flat on the wood surface. "You wrote the audit protocol," Cole said. He'd read it over her shoulder, which she hadn't objected to. "I wrote it for the scenario where I was the one being corrupt," she said. "I thought, if I ever lost my way, I wanted there to be a mechanism that could catch it. I never imagined I'd be on the other side of it." She paused. "I suppose that's the problem with building protections. You imagine certain kinds of threats and not others." "You imagined yourself," Darius said from the kitchen, where he was going through the cabinet inventory with the pragmatic focus of someone who'd done this before. "Most people wouldn't do that. Most people build systems to protect against everyone except themselves." Elena looked at him. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation," Darius said. "But yeah, it is." She almost smiled. It didn't quite make it, but it was close. The morning moved into midday with the particular slowness of a situation where action wasn't available yet, and waiting was the entire job. Darius produced canned soup from the cabinet stock and crackers that were slightly stale but functional, and they ate in the main room with the windows open to the sound of wind through the trees and the occasional bird and nothing else. The distance from the city felt real in a way that was both a relief and an anxiety. They were safer here, but removed from the active situation, and information was going to be slow. Cole asked Darius about the name Meridian Consolidated during lunch, more specifically than he had in the apartment. Darius was careful with his answer. "What I know is secondhand, and it's 18 months old," he said. But the context it came up in, it wasn't a financial conversation. It was an operational one. Someone connected to the defense contractor space mentioned the name in relation to an acquisition that went sideways. A technology acquisition. The seller walked away from the deal after what was described as pressure tactics. Nobody used the word coercion, but the way it was described, he shook his head. The pattern fits what's happening here. They acquire what they want when they can, and they take it when they can't. "Who runs it?" Elena asked. "That's the part I don't have." The organization is structured to keep that answer obscure. Lots of insulation between the top and the operational layer. He looked at her directly. Which is part of why getting your evidence into the legal record was the right first move. These people are sophisticated enough that if you'd gone directly to law enforcement without legal protection in place, the evidence could have been challenged or buried before it reached anyone who could act on it. Sandra knew that, Elena said. The injunction isn't the end of it. It's the door. Once it's open, the federal fraud statutes pull in the SEC and potentially the DOJ, and once those agencies have the filing, Meridian can't suppress it through any channel they have without making things significantly worse for themselves. "How long?" Cole asked. "For an indictment? Months. Possibly longer." She said it without flinching, which Cole noted. But the immediate threat changes. Once federal agencies are actively looking, the cost of running an extraction operation on U.S. soil goes up dramatically. These people are rational actors. They'll pull back. Or accelerate, Darius said, if they think they're running out of time. The word landed in the room with its full weight, and nobody argued with it. It was at 1:30 in the afternoon that the situation changed. The borrowed phone rang. Not a text. A call. From Sandra's new number, and Elena picked up before the second ring. Cole watched her face while she listened. He'd gotten reasonably good at reading her in the past 16 hours. The way her expression organized itself when she was processing information, the specific tension that appeared between her eyebrows when something was bad versus when something was complicated. What crossed her face now was something he hadn't seen from her yet, and it took him a moment to identify it because it didn't fit the pattern of the rest of her. It was fear, not the operational fear of the night before, the adrenaline-driven alertness of someone being chased. This was something older and more personal. "When?" she said into the phone. A pause. "How bad?" Not a question, exactly. "Okay, don't, yes, stay there. I'll call you back." She lowered the phone. "Richard Sato resigned this morning," she said, about 40 minutes after the board was notified of the injunction. He cleaned out his office and walked out of the building. The auditors flagged it and notified Sandra because it matches the flight pattern that triggers enhanced fraud protocols. She stopped. He also accessed the secure research server before he left. The auditors caught it in the access log. He pulled the full compound specification file, the third-generation cellular repair data, all of it. Cole went very still. "He doesn't have the physical data," Elena continued, working through it. "The specifications live in the server, but he downloaded a complete copy to a portable drive, which means he's completing the transfer," Darius said. "The injunction froze the financial channels, so the direct data sale pipeline is cut off. But if he physically delivers the drive to a Meridian contact, the legal process doesn't move fast enough to stop a physical handoff," Elena finished. "Once that data is in their hands, the injunction is almost irrelevant. They can take it offshore, file alternative patents in jurisdictions outside U.S. reach, and we spend the next 10 years in international litigation trying to prove prior ownership." She stood up. "I need to get back to the city." "Elena, Cole, that file is everything. It's not just the company. The research on that drive represents 4 years of development that could have genuine medical application. Real application." If Meridian gets it and buries it because it suits their commercial interests, or sells it to the highest bidder rather than bringing it to market, she stopped herself. I understand the risk. I'm not asking you to come with me, but I have to go. Cole looked at her. He looked at the window. He looked at Darius. Darius was already on his feet, putting the bowls in the sink with the deliberate efficiency of a man who had made a decision and was now moving into execution. The question is where Sato is going, he said. If he's making a handoff, he's either going to a Meridian contact already in the city, or he's heading to a transport point, private aviation, probably. The commercial airports will flag his name through the court system once Sandra files the supplemental motion, but that takes time. Do we know where he lives? Cole asked Elena. Lake Oswego, south of the city. If he's heading to a private airfield, the most likely options are south or east of the metro area. He wouldn't go north, that adds time and exposure. Darius was already looking at his tablet. There are 4 private airfields within reasonable range in that direction. Stafford, Mulino, 2 smaller strips near Molalla. Can you narrow it? Cole asked. I can try. Darius was typing something. I still have contacts in the aviation monitoring space. Not official contacts, but real ones. Make the call, Cole said. He looked at Elena while Darius stepped away to the other room. She was standing in the middle of the main room with her arms crossed, not hugging herself exactly, more like she was holding her own structure together by pressure. The borrowed jacket, the canvas sneakers, the rubber band in her hair. She looked nothing like the CEO of anything, and also entirely like someone who had built something real and was not going to let it be taken. I should have seen it earlier, she said. With Sato. There were signs, small ones. He started being less communicative about the compound research about a year ago. I thought it was the pressure of the final development phase. I thought he needed space. She shook her head slightly. I gave him space and he used it. You gave someone you'd worked with for 7 years the benefit of the doubt, Cole said. That's not a failure. That's what working with people looks like. In my position, it's supposed to be a failure. I'm supposed to know. Nobody knows, Cole said. People who tell you they would have caught it sooner are people who haven't been through it. She looked at him. You've been through it. He didn't answer immediately. Through the wall, they could hear Darius's voice, low and steady on the phone. I lost a teammate, Cole said finally. Somalia, 4 years ago. Different kind of betrayal, Sampuang, not a deliberate one. He made a call in the field that he genuinely thought was right, and it got 2 people killed. I was angry at him for a long time after. Angry that I hadn't seen it coming, that I hadn't known he was the kind of person who would make that call. He looked at the window. Took me about 2 years to understand that I couldn't have known. Not because I wasn't paying attention, but because people are always capable of surprising you, in both directions. Elena was quiet for a moment. Is that why you left? What happened in Somalia? Partly, he said. It was the last in a series of things that added up to a number I couldn't live with anymore. He said it with the honesty of someone who'd already worked through the rationalizations and arrived at the plain version. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't present. Even when I was with Rosie, I was somewhere else in my head, running the numbers, thinking about what came next. That's not a life, that's a mechanism. And now? He considered the question seriously. Now I sleep, he said. Most nights. Darius came back into the room with his jacket on. Molino Airfield, he said. Small private strip, 40 minutes south. My contact flagged a flight plan filed this morning under a Meridian-adjacent charter company name. Vague enough that it wouldn't trip automated flags, but my contact knows the company. The plane was supposed to depart at 3 p.m. He checked his watch. It was 1:47. We have time. Not a lot. We need to get ahead of him, Cole said. Not intercept on the airfield. Too exposed. Too many variables. Somewhere between Sato's house and the strip, on a route he's likely to take. 97A through Tualatin, Darius said. Only reasonable south route from Lake Oswego to Molino that avoids the freeway. He pulled up the map. There's a stretch here, about 8 miles out of Tualatin, where the road narrows, and there's an agricultural supply depot on the right side. The lot is usually empty in the afternoon. Good sight lines both directions. How do we stop him without... Elena started. We don't need to stop him physically, Cole said. "We need to stall him long enough for the legal mechanism to catch up. If Sandra can get the supplemental motion filed and have it served before he reaches that airfield, his flight plan becomes unenforceable and the charter company is liable." Elena was already on the phone to Sandra before he finished the sentence, which he appreciated. She didn't wait for people to complete thoughts she'd already caught. They were in Darius's SUV and moving by 2 o'clock. The drive south was tense in a contained way. Nobody talking unless it was relevant, the landscape shifting from city to suburban to the wider, quieter territory south of the metro area. Fields and nurseries and the occasional farm equipment dealer. The sky had made good on its morning ambiguity and was producing actual sunlight now, low and pale, the kind that came after a storm and felt slightly unconvincing. Sandra called back at 2:24. The supplemental motion was filed. Service would take approximately 40 minutes to reach the charter company through the court's official channels, which meant they needed Sato to be somewhere other than that airfield for the next 40 minutes. "Can you reach him directly?" Cole asked Elena. She stared at the phone. "I have his number. If you call him, you show him you know where he's going. If I don't call him, he might be wheels up before the service hits." Cole thought about it. "Call him. Don't tell him you know about the airfield, tell him you know about the drive. He already knows you know about the memo. The injunction tells him that. Tell him you want to talk before this goes further. Make him think there's a negotiated exit available." "Is there?" she said. Not cynically, actually asking. "That's not my call. But it doesn't matter right now. What matters is whether he believes it long enough to slow down." Elena looked at the road ahead for a moment. Then she dialed. 3 rings. 4. Cole thought he wasn't going to pick up. He picked up on the 5th. "Elena." Richard Sato's voice was careful and controlled in the way of someone who had been expecting this call and had prepared for it, which itself told her something. He wasn't surprised, he wasn't panicked, he was managed. That was its own kind of information. "Richard," she kept her voice level. Cole watched her hand on the phone, and it wasn't shaking. "I think you know why I'm calling." "I imagine I have some idea," he said. "The injunction was thorough. Your lawyer works fast." "I trained her," Elena said, which was not true, but landed with the confidence of something that was. "I need you to stop what you're doing right now, Richard, not because of the legal exposure. You already know the legal exposure, because of what you're carrying. You know what that research is. You were part of building it." A pause. "That's a sentimental argument, Elena." "It's a practical one. The moment that data crosses to Meridian, you lose any negotiating position you have with federal prosecutors. Right now, you're a participant. An hour from now, you're the delivery mechanism, and they will treat you accordingly." Another pause, longer this time. Cole watched the road, and Darius drove, and the seconds went by with the slowness of things that actually mattered. "What are you offering?" Sato said. "Talk to me," Elena said. "In person. Give Sandra 2 hours with you before you do anything else. That's all I'm asking. And if I choose not to, then you make your choices and you live with them. But Richard, you've known me for 7 years. Have I ever offered something I wasn't willing to follow through on?" The longest pause yet. Cole counted 8 seconds. "Where?" Sato said. Elena looked at Cole. He held up a hand. "Wait." He was looking at the GPS, calculating. "Tualatin," Elena said. "Sandra's associate has an office there. I'll text you the address." She looked at Cole and he nodded. "Give him a real address, something verifiable, something that doesn't feel like a trap." Elena pulled a real law office address in Tualatin from a quick search on the borrowed phone. She read it to Sato. 1 hour, Sato said, and disconnected. Elena lowered the phone. Her exhale was controlled but audible. "Will he come?" Darius said. "I don't know," Elena said honestly. "He's rational. If he thinks there's a better exit through cooperation than through delivery, maybe. But I couldn't tell from his voice which direction he was leaning." "Either way, we just bought 40 minutes, Cole said, "which is what we needed." They pulled over 2 miles north of the agricultural depot and waited. Darius kept the engine running. Outside, the road was quiet. A tractor-trailer going south, 2 pickup trucks going north, nothing else for long stretches. The sunlight moved across the field on the left side of the road, and somewhere behind them a hawk was working a thermal and not finding what it was looking for. Sandra's text came at 3:02. Service confirmed. Charter company notified. Flight plan voided. 2 minutes later, Elena's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Richard Sato. She answered. The charter company called me, he said. His voice had changed. The controlled quality was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. Not panic, not anger. Something more resigned than either of those. Flight's been voided. I know, she said. You used the call to buy time. I used the call to give you an option, she said. The time was a side effect. A sound from his end that might have been a short, humorless acknowledgement. You're better at this than Marcus told me you were. Marcus hasn't known me as well as he thought he did for a while now, she said. No. A long pause. I have the drive. I know you do. If I return it, the full data, intact, no copies transmitted. Talk to Sandra, Elena said. Today. That conversation needs to happen with a lawyer in the room, Richard, not with me. I want it in writing that I came to you before. Sandra will document everything. That's what she does. Elena's voice had no warmth in it exactly, but it wasn't cold either. It was the voice of someone being clear because clarity was the only decent thing to offer right now. This is the call where you make the decision, Richard. I can't make it for you. The line was quiet for long enough that Cole began to think it had dropped. Send me the address, Sato said. Elena sent it. She put the phone down and looked out the window at the field and the hawk and the pale afternoon light. He's coming in? Darius said. He says he is. And if he's running a counterplay, buying his own time while he tries another route to the airfield, then Sandra is already notified, and the voided flight plan means any rescheduled departure goes through court notification first. She paused. And I don't think he is. I think he's tired. Cole looked at her. How do you know? Because I heard it, she said. 7 years of working with someone. You know what their tired sounds like. She said it without satisfaction. Just the flat, slightly bruised recognition of someone who had known something and now knew something different about the same person. He's been carrying this for 14 months. Whatever they offered him, whatever rationale he built around it, it's heavy. I could hear it. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Darius put the SUV in gear. We should get back to the city, he said. Be there when the meeting happens. Cole agreed. They turned north and drove, and the hawk over the field finally found what it was looking for or gave up looking and dropped below the tree line. And either way, it was gone. The meeting with Sato happened at 4:45 in the offices of Sandra's associate, a small actual law office with actual uncomfortable chairs and a conference table that had seen better decades. Sandra was there when they arrived. She had printed copies of key documents and a digital recorder running on the table, and the expression of a woman who had prepared for exactly this without knowing it was coming, which was, Cole was learning, simply how Sandra Cho operated. Sato came in alone. He looked worse than Cole had expected. Not physically diminished, but the specific worn quality of someone who had been managing a large internal weight for a long time and had just been told he didn't have to manage it anymore. He set the drive on the conference table without being asked. I want it on the record, he said, sitting down without preamble, that I never intended for anyone to be physically harmed. The record will reflect what the record reflects, Sandra said, in a tone that was neither reassuring nor harsh. Let's start at the beginning. When were you first approached by representatives of Meridian Consolidated? Cole and Darius stayed in the waiting area while the meeting ran. Cole sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, and his hands loose in his lap. Darius sat beside him and read something on his phone. At some point, the receptionist brought them water, and neither of them asked for it. You're already thinking about what comes after this, Darius said, not looking up from his phone. When isn't there a what comes after? Cole said. There isn't always an unknown principle, Darius said. Sato and Hale are accounted for. The operation is disrupted. But whoever runs Meridian, whoever gave the order to escalate to a physical extraction operation, that person hasn't been named yet. Sandra's going to push Sato on it in there. And if Sato doesn't know, These operations are compartmented. Hale might not know either. Darius lowered his phone. Someone made the decision to send armed contractors after a CEO in a U.S. city. That's not a decision made from inside a biotech company. That's someone with a history of making that kind of decision and accepting the consequences. I know, Cole said. That person knows Elena is still out there, knows the legal process is moving, and knows that the physical operation failed. I know, Darius. I'm just making sure you're thinking about it. I've been thinking about it since 2 o'clock this morning, Cole said. He looked at the door to the conference room. We need a name. Yeah, Darius said. We do. The conference room door opened at 6:20. Sandra came out first and she looked at Cole with the expression of someone who had just extracted something useful from a difficult conversation. He gave us a name, she said. The Meridian contact he was dealing with. The person who coordinated the financial transfers. A man named Vincent Cray. He's a senior acquisitions director for a holding group called Halloran Partners, which has a registered address in Delaware and operational offices in Hups. She checked her notes. 3 cities, Seattle, Singapore, and London. Halloran Partners, Cole repeated. The name doesn't appear anywhere in the Meridian Consolidated Corporate Filings, Sandra said. But Sato says Cray made it very clear that Halloran was the entity he represented and that Meridian was a vehicle, not the principal. So Meridian is the arm, Darius said. Halloran is the body. That's what it looks like, Sandra said. She looked at Cole directly. Which means the injunction and Sato's cooperation shuts down one channel. But Vincent Cray and Halloran Partners are still out there, and they are significantly unhappy right now. Cole looked at Elena, who had come out of the conference room behind Sandra and was standing with her arms crossed, and the expression of someone adding up a column of numbers, and not quite finishing before the next column starts. Vincent Cray, she said. That name. I've heard it. From where? Cole said. She was thinking. An industry conference, 2 years ago. Someone mentioned Halloran Partners in relation to a failed acquisition in the pharmaceutical space, a European company that walked away from a deal under pressure. I heard the name Cray in that context. She looked at Sandra. He was described as the person who managed the pressure. Managed how? Darius said. Elena met his eyes. The way things are managed when they can't be managed legally, she said. The room went quiet. Outside, Portland was doing what Portland did at the end of a long day. Traffic thickening, the light going amber and then gray, a city settling into its evening with the unremarkable persistence of a place that had been through enough to take most things in stride. Inside the waiting room of a small law office with uncomfortable chairs, 5 people sat with the knowledge that the visible part of the problem had been addressed, and the invisible part was still out there, attached to a name, operating from cities they were not in, calculating what to do next. Cole looked at Elena. She looked back at him. Neither of them had slept properly in over 30 hours. She had a bruised shoulder and a borrowed jacket, and a company that was in the middle of the most significant legal crisis of its existence, and she looked, not fine, because she wasn't fine, but steady. The kind of steady that came from people who'd been through the worst part of something and had come out the other side not unmarked, but upright. Okay, Cole said. So we find Vincent Cray. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plan. Not yet. It was just the next true thing, said out loud to make it real. The way you said the next true thing when the options had narrowed down to one and all that was left was the doing of it. Sandra was already reaching for her phone. Sandra found Vincent Cray in 45 minutes. Not his location, not yet, but his pattern. She had a researcher on retainer, a former investigative journalist named Tom Lau, who had spent 15 years following corporate money through jurisdictions designed to make money unfollowable. And Tom came back with a picture that was less dramatic than the name had suggested and more dangerous for being mundane. Vincent Cray was 56 years old, based primarily in Seattle, and had spent the last 12 years running acquisitions for Halloran Partners with the patient, methodical approach of someone who understood that the most effective kind of pressure was the kind that looked from the outside like ordinary business. He had no criminal record. He had 3 civil suits in his history, all settled out of court under confidentiality agreements. He had a reputation in certain corners of the industry as someone you did not want across a negotiating table from you, which was described by the people Tom spoke to in terms that were carefully chosen to convey meaning without providing anything actionable. "He's in Seattle right now," Sandra said, reading from Tom's message. His assistant booked a dinner reservation at a restaurant in Belltown for tonight at 8. Tom found it through a loyalty program breach that I'm going to pretend I don't know the details of. "So he's not running," Elena said. "Why would he run?" Darius said. "From his perspective, the operation failed, but his fingerprints aren't on it. The contractors don't report to him directly. Sato knows his name, but Sato's cooperation agreement is with federal prosecutors, and federal prosecutors move at their own pace." He looked at the table. "Cray is sitting in Seattle eating dinner because he's done this before, and he knows how long the legal process takes, and he believes he has time." "He does have time," Cole said. "Legally. But legally isn't the only dimension this needs to be resolved on." Everyone looked at him. Cole had been quiet for the last 20 minutes in the specific way that meant he was building something rather than waiting. Elena had learned that distinction in the past 36 hours. The quiet that was absence and the quiet that was construction looked similar from the outside and were entirely different things. Cray authorized a physical operation against a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil, Cole said. "That's not a civil matter. That's federal criminal exposure, conspiracy, extortion, potentially more depending on what the contractors were instructed to do if they'd actually caught up with Elena. If Sato's testimony is credible and it ties Cray to the authorization, the DOJ has a case. But Sato only knows Cray as the financial contact. He can testify to the payments and the data arrangement. He can't directly tie Cray to the physical operation." He looked at Sandra. "What do you need to make that connection?" Sandra considered it. "Communication records between Cray and Hale. Specifically anything that references the extraction operation. Text, email, encrypted app, doesn't matter, as long as it exists in a recoverable form." "Hale has those records," Elena said, "or had them. If he wiped his devices—" "He didn't," Darius said. Everyone turned to him. He had the expression of a man who had anticipated this moment and was now arriving at it. "I've been running a parallel track. I have a contact at a federal level who became interested in Halloran Partners about 6 months ago for reasons unrelated to Whitmore Biotech. When I reached out this afternoon and connected Halloran to what's happening here," he paused. "They moved fast. Hale's devices were imaged before he had an opportunity to wipe them. The imaging happened about 2 hours ago." A silence followed this. "Darius," Cole said carefully, "who is this contact?" "Someone I trust," Darius said. "Someone who's been building a case against Halloran Partners' acquisition practices for 6 months and just received a significant amount of new evidence through Sandra's filing that they didn't have before." He looked at Sandra. "They want a joint briefing, tonight, if possible. Sato's testimony, the financial records from the drive, and whatever is on Hale's devices combined with what they already have." Sandra took off her glasses and set them on the table and looked at the ceiling for exactly 3 seconds. This was, Cole had come to understand, her version of a significant reaction. If their investigation is already active, a joint briefing accelerates everything. Cray doesn't have weeks, he has days, maybe less. "He needs to not know that," Cole said. "If Cray knows the federal investigation is active and convergent, he's on a plane to London tonight and we're in extradition territory for the next 3 years. "So he eats his dinner in Belltown," Elena said slowly, "thinking he has time while the case closes behind him." "That's the goal," Cole said. It was Elena who said what needed to be said next, in the quiet voice of someone who had been arriving at a decision over the past hour and had finally reached it. "I want to be in that briefing." Sandra started to object on reflex. Client safety, procedural reasons, the standard architecture of caution. But Elena held up a hand. "I'm not asking as a victim. I'm asking as a CEO who has spent the last 36 hours accumulating information about how this operation worked that I haven't fully transferred yet. I know my company's systems in a way that even Sato can't fully account for. There are access points and data pathways in Whitmore's infrastructure that I designed personally. If Cray's people had access to the server through Sato, I can tell investigators exactly what was accessible and what wasn't, and what that implies about what Meridian actually received before the operation was disrupted." She looked at Sandra steadily. "Put me in the room." Sandra studied her for a long moment. Fine, she said. But I'm next to you the entire time, and you don't answer anything without looking at me first. Agreed. The briefing happened at 9 that night in a conference room in a building downtown that had no signage and a security desk that required 3 separate forms of identification and still looked like it might turn you away if it felt like it. Darius's contact turned out to be a woman named Agent Patricia Dunn. Compact, late 40s, with the kind of face that gave nothing away and the kind of attention that took everything in. She had 2 colleagues with her and a case file that, when she laid it open on the table, was thick enough to suggest that Halloran Partners had been making powerful enemies in federal circles for longer than any of them had realized. Cole sat against the wall because he was not officially part of any of this, and he understood that and didn't push it. He watched Elena sit across from Agent Dunn and do what Elena apparently did in rooms that mattered. She organized herself, and then she talked. And the talking was precise and structured and occasionally interrupted by Sandra and never once self-pitying. And the agents across the table leaned forward in the specific way that people leaned when they were getting exactly what they needed. At one point, Agent Dunn looked up from her notes and said, "You said you designed the server access architecture personally. Can you walk me through the pathways that would have been available to someone with Sato's credentials?" And Elena walked her through it, all of it. 40 minutes of technical detail delivered from memory, with occasional pauses to ask Sandra if something was privileged, and Sandra said yes twice and no the rest of the time. And by the end of it, Agent Dunn had 3 full pages of new notes and the expression of someone who had just received a gift they hadn't expected. At 11:40 p.m., while Vincent Cray was presumably finishing dinner in Belltown, with no reason to believe his evening was anything other than what it appeared to be, federal agents in Seattle made contact with the restaurant. They waited outside. When Cray exited at 12:15 a.m., they were there. Sandra got the call at 12:47. She came out of the hallway where she'd taken it and stood in the doorway of the conference room and looked at Elena with the neutral expression that she deployed to contain significant news. "Cray is in federal custody," she said. "They've also picked up 2 of the contractors from last night, the ones who ran the sweep pattern. The 3rd is being located." She paused. Marcus Hale turned himself in at 11 p.m. His lawyer negotiated the surrender. He's cooperating. The room was quiet. Elena sat with her hands flat on the table, the same way she'd sat in Sandra's office that morning, with the drive between them. She didn't cry. She didn't visibly exhale or let anything dramatic cross her face. She just sat there for a moment with the information, and Cole watched her absorb it the way material absorbed force, not by resisting it, but by taking it in and redistributing it, changing shape slightly, becoming something different from what she'd been before. "Okay," she said finally. That was all. Just that. Cole thought that single word contained more than most people's paragraphs. It was past 1 in the morning when they finally left the building. The night was clear. The storm had pushed through and left Portland washed and cold, the streets reflecting streetlight in long yellow smears on the wet pavement. Darius had his hands in his jacket pockets and was looking at the sky with the expression of a man who had done what was needed and was now processing the fact that it was over, more or less, in the way that things were ever over. "I owe you," Cole said. Darius looked at him sideways. "You don't." "Darius." Cole. He said it with the quiet finality that was his version of the same register Cole used with Rosie. "You don't owe me. That's not how this works, and you know that." A pause. "But you could call more than once every 8 months." "Yeah," Cole said, "I could. Rosie's at 7 now. I've missed things." Cole heard the thing underneath that, the actual weight of it. Darius had been there from the beginning, in the hospital when Rosie was born, during the deployments, during the aftermath. Walking away from the work had meant, without Cole intending it, walking partially away from Darius too. And that was a cost he hadn't fully accounted for at the time, and had been carrying imperfectly ever since. "Come to dinner," Cole said. "Sunday. She'll want to show you whatever she's working on. Last week it was a science project about tidal patterns that was honestly more sophisticated than it had any right to be." Darius almost smiled. All the way this time. Tidal patterns. "She found a book at the library and just went?" "Yeah," Darius said. "That sounds about right." He looked at Elena, who was standing a few feet away with Sandra, their conversation winding down. "She going to be okay?" "She's already okay," Cole said. That's what's kind of remarkable about her. Darius studied him for a moment with the discerning attention of someone who'd known Cole for 12 years. He didn't say what that look meant. He didn't have to. "Sunday dinner," he said. "I'll bring something." "Mrs. Adkins always makes too much anyway." "Then I'll bring beer," Darius said. He walked to his SUV, and Cole let him go, and the night was quiet around them. Sandra left shortly after. She had filings to prepare in the morning and approximately 4 hours of sleep available to her if she left right now and used all of them, which her expression suggested she intended to do with the discipline she applied to everything. She hugged Elena briefly, which surprised Cole because Sandra did not read as a spontaneous hugger, and said something low that he couldn't hear, and Elena nodded, and then Sandra was gone. Which left the two of them on a sidewalk in downtown Portland at 1:30 in the morning with the case closed around them like a room whose door had finally shut, and neither of them quite knowing what the ordinary shape of the next minute was supposed to be. "I need to get Rosie in the morning," Cole said. "I know. She'll be at Mrs. Adkins. She'll be fine, but she'll want—" He stopped himself. "She'll want her own bed." "Of course she will." Elena looked at him. She still had his jacket on. She'd had it for, he counted back, about 19 hours. "I need to call my board first thing tomorrow. There's going to be an emergency meeting, probably, and interim executive decisions to make, and a company that is currently in the middle of a legal process that's going to take months to fully resolve." She said it with the tone of someone cataloging a workload, not complaining about it. "It's going to be loud for a while." "Yeah," he said. "I'd imagine." A pause. A cab went by. Somewhere a block away, a restaurant was still open, its light spilling orange across the pavement. "Cole." She was looking at him with the direct, unself-conscious attention that he'd noticed from the first hour, the quality of looking that didn't manage itself. "I don't know how to adequately say what I want to say right now, so I'm just going to say the plain version, which is that I would not be standing here if it weren't for you. Not in the abstract, literally. I would not be standing on this street right now." He looked at the middle distance. "You would have found another way." "I might have," she said, "but this was the way I found, and you were in it." She hesitated, which was uncharacteristic, and he noticed. "I'm going to be in a very complicated situation for the foreseeable future, legally, professionally, personally, and I understand if that's—" "Elena, I'm trying to give you an exit." "I know you are," he said. "I don't want one." She went still for a moment in the particular way of someone who had braced for a certain answer and received a different one. "I'm not going to be easy to know," she said. "I should be honest about that. I'm difficult in ways I'm aware of, and probably in ways I'm not. I work too much. I get inside my own head. I spent the first 6 years of my professional life treating relationships as things to be managed, rather than the other thing. The other thing," he repeated. "Whatever the other thing is, that I've been less good at." He looked at her then, properly. The rubber band in her hair, and the borrowed clothes, and the 19 hours of everything she'd just come through, and underneath all of that, the same person who'd walked into his shop at 11 at night and told him the plain truth about her situation because she'd decided he deserved honesty before she'd had any reason to trust him. That was who she was. He'd seen it enough times now to know it wasn't performance. "I have a 7-year-old who talks to her crayon drawings when she thinks I can't hear," he said. "I wake up at 4 in the morning sometimes and check the locks, even though we live in the quietest neighborhood in Portland. I don't talk about the things I've done in a way that will ever fully satisfy anyone who wants to understand them. I'm not going to be easy either." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. And that was how it started. Not with a declaration or a dramatic gesture, but with two imperfect people standing on a wet sidewalk at 1:30 in the morning, telling each other the plain truth about their limitations and deciding that the truth was sufficient, maybe more than sufficient. Maybe it was the only foundation that had ever actually held anything. 3 months later, Cole Bennett was still a mechanic. He'd had the conversation with Elena about the security position at Whitmore Biotech. She'd offered it formally with documentation and a salary figure that made him genuinely quiet for a moment, and he'd said no. She hadn't pushed. She'd said she'd known he was going to say no and had offered anyway because she thought he deserved to be asked. He'd said he appreciated that. They'd had dinner after, at a diner 2 blocks from the shop, and Rosie had ordered pancakes at 6 in the evening because nobody was stopping her. And Elena had eaten most of them because Rosie had declared herself full after approximately 4 bites. And it was the most normal dinner Cole had sat through in longer than he could clearly recall. The shop was doing well. Not dramatically well. He wasn't expanding or taking on staff or doing any of the things that would signal a changed trajectory. He was doing the quiet, consistent kind of well that most people didn't recognize as success because it didn't announce itself. Regular customers, fair prices, work done correctly. The kind of reputation that built itself without advertising because it was just the truth about what you did. Marcus Hale pled guilty in February. His cooperation agreement required full testimony, and he gave it, methodically, completely, with the particular emptiness of a man who had run out of things to protect. His sentencing was set for spring. Richard Sato received a reduced charge in exchange for his own testimony and the return of the data drive. The federal case against Vincent Cray and Halloran Partners was, according to Sandra, proceeding in the dense, grinding way that serious federal cases proceeded, which meant it would be years before it fully resolved. But it was resolving, moving in one direction, unmistakably forward. Elena rebuilt the company's security division from scratch. She hired people she vetted personally, established oversight structures that were redundant by design, and put in place a whistleblower protocol that she described to the board as non-negotiable and meant it. The board, chastened by proximity to what had almost happened, did not push back. She was in the shop on a Thursday afternoon in late March when Rosie was doing homework at the workbench and Cole was finishing an oil change on a minivan that had seen better years. Elena came in with 2 coffees from the place down the block and set one near Cole's elbow without interrupting what he was doing and sat on the stool by the cabinet with the drawings on it. There were new drawings now. Rosie had been adding to the collection for weeks. A dog that was definitely a horse, several portraits of people whose identities were confirmed by labels, and one drawing that Rosie had presented to Elena without comment 2 weeks ago and that had ended up taped next to the others. In it, 4 stick figures stood in front of a house. The labels were precise. Daddy, Rosie, Elena, Rosie's fish. The fish was represented by what appeared to be a blue oval with lines. Elena sat and drank her coffee and looked at the drawing and felt the particular warmth of being seen clearly by a 7-year-old, which was both more honest and more terrifying than being seen by most adults. "Good day?" Cole asked from under the minivan. "Long day," she said. "Good meeting at 3. Board approved the research funding expansion. The 3rd-generation compound goes into clinical trial prep next quarter." She said it with the specific quiet of someone reporting something significant in a register that understood its own significance and didn't need to perform it. 4 years of work. "Yeah," Cole said. "It's going to help people," she said. "That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the legal resolution, not rebuilding the company. The fact that the actual research is going to reach the people it was designed for. That's the part worth coming back to," he said. Rosie looked up from her homework. "Elena, how do you spell photosynthesis?" "Photosynthesis," Elena said, without hesitation. Rosie wrote it carefully, sounding the letters under her breath. "My teacher says it's the most important word in biology." "Your teacher might be right. What's the most important word in business?" Elena thought about it. Not quickly. She actually thought about it, which was one of the things Rosie had figured out about her early on, that Elena took questions seriously, regardless of who asked them. "Probably trust," Elena said finally, "but only if you've earned it first." Rosie considered this. "How do you earn it?" "You show up," Elena said, "consistently, even when it's inconvenient, especially then." Rosie looked at her father's legs sticking out from under the minivan and then back at Elena, and something in her small face arranged itself into an expression of satisfaction, like someone who had just confirmed a theory they'd been quietly developing for a while. "Okay," Rosie said, and went back to her homework. Cole rolled out from under the van and sat up and looked at Elena with grease on his hands and his gray work shirt and the specific unhurried quality of a man who had built his life slowly and deliberately around the things that actually mattered to him, and was, most days, at peace with what he'd built. Not finished. You were never finished, That was the thing most people didn't understand about the lives worth living. They were ongoing and imperfect and constantly requiring maintenance, like every other thing worth keeping, but at peace. There's a version of this story that ends with a dramatic resolution, courtrooms and verdicts, and someone holding a trophy. And that version has its satisfactions. The law did its work. The people who built an operation on theft and coercion faced consequences. The research that was worth stealing reached the people it was built to heal. But the part of the story that stayed with Cole, that he thought about on the occasional 4 in the morning when he got up and checked the locks out of old habit, and then stood in the kitchen in the dark for a few minutes before going back to bed, was simpler than any of that. It was a man and a woman and a 7-year-old in a repair shop on a Thursday afternoon, doing ordinary things in the particular way of people who had chosen, with full knowledge of the alternatives, to be exactly where they were. No drama in it, no announcement, just the quiet weight of a life that had been deliberately constructed to hold the things that deserved to be held. He'd spent years operating in situations where the stakes were as high as stakes got. He'd been trained to understand that significance lived in those moments. The mission, the objective, the thing that couldn't fail. And he didn't dismiss that. Those things had mattered. The people involved had mattered. He carried them. But standing in his shop on a Thursday afternoon with coffee cooling on the workbench and his daughter spelling out biology words, and Elena Whitmore on the stool by the cabinet, looking at a child's drawing of their household like it was something worth looking at. He understood, in the way you understood things that didn't require argument, that this was also significance. Maybe it was a different order of it, the small and daily and unwitnessed kind that nobody wrote about because it didn't have a shape that translated into narrative, but that was the actual architecture of a human life, the thing underneath everything else. The reason the other things mattered at all. He picked up a shop rag and cleaned his hands. "Dinner tonight?" Elena said. "Mrs. Adkins made something," he said. "She texted me about it for 20 minutes this morning, so it's probably significant. Should I be nervous?" "She's been cooking since 1974, Cole said. "You should be grateful." Elena smiled. All the way. The one that she didn't always let happen, but had been letting happen more lately, and that Rosie had once described, with characteristic directness, as your actually happy face. "Grateful," Elena said. "I can do that." Outside, Portland went about its Thursday. Traffic and rain smell and the ordinary sound of a city that didn't know and didn't need to know about the particular people inside it and the particular life being built, one unremarkable day at a time, in a repair shop on its outskirts. The kind of life that wouldn't make the news. The kind that lasted.